Hi, Tony and I want to welcome you to our study today. And when we learn about how to do blog articles, they tell us to put sort of striking and controversial headings on them, and that way people will click and check to see what you're talking about. So my heading today is Paul, a champion of women's rights. Now, you might read that and think, Bob, you've just lost your mind. But the truth is, if we dig into the history of what was going on in 50 AD Corinth, we'll find out that Paul actually was a champion of women's rights. So we need to look at family life in Corinth, and so let's do it. In Corinth, marriages were arranged. Now, you've heard me talk about status in Corinth, and it was the biggest thing. Guess what? A marriage was intended to give you status. And it was based on that as opposed to other things.
In addition to status, a good marriage was one that added to the wealth of the husband.
We can't beat that as a guy. You get a status wife and you get her money too. Nice deal. Well, in a male-dominated society, women were usually much younger than the man, like in our marriage, but not like in our marriage. They were dominated by the husband.
Unlike marriage in the Western world today, love was not the most important component of a good marriage. If couples were able to live in peace and harmony with each other, that was the ultimate good marriage.
That's crazy. There are actually writings in Greek history stating if you can just get along with your wife or your husband, you got it. Isn't that great? So in AD 50 Corinth, there were no marriage licenses and there were no marriage ceremonies. All the couple had to do is say, let's get together, go home, we're married.
A woman was not legally protected in the event of a divorce. If a husband wanted a divorce, he could say, take your things and go, and that was the end of the marriage.
Now, another thing is kind of different. There was no social distancing in Corinth. In fact, the home was a place where the husband did his business, whatever it might be. It might be a shop. Front room was a shop. Or the wife taught the children, or there were social gatherings, leaning out the window, talking to your neighbor who was probably as close as we are from the windows of our house.
Women were able to work outside of the home. Their income added to the wealth and stability of the family.
When the Jews and the Christians arrived in Corinth, they were viewed as outside religious influences. They were tolerated, but they were never really accepted by the general population.
These outside religions provided many things that the family also provided: togetherness, a feeling of belonging, spiritual comfort, and a place to be oneself.
If you read Paul's letter to the Corinthians through the eyes of 50 AD and not through the thoughts of 2021, you will see that he was in favor of women and also people of low status. When we read this letter, we know it was a correspondence between Paul and the church. We don't have their side of the conversation, so it's almost like listening to one end of a phone conversation. I'm going to ask the questions that we suppose they might have asked. Tony's going to read Paul's responses. So question number 1, should Christians abstain from sexual relations?
The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. 1 Corinthians 7, 3 and 4.
In a male-dominated society, women probably wanted the freedom with what to do with their body. Paul gave them that freedom in these words. He gave them permission to take control of their own body in relation to their husband. What's interesting here, and this would have been pretty radical in Corinth in that day, he said the woman had authority over the man's body too, which would have been a big deal then. It's kind of hard for us to conceive now, but it was a big deal then. This giving of one another to each other, to me, is a beautiful picture of the self-giving love that Paul talks about. It is the theme of 1 Corinthians. I suggest to you that to have, whether you're in 50 AD or you're 2021, to have the best kind of relationship with your spouse, live in self-giving love. Try to outgive one another with all sorts of kindness and goodness. Here's another question. Should people, especially widows, remain single?
To the unmarried and the widows I say that it is well for them to remain unmarried as I am. But if they are not practicing self-control, they should marry, for it is better to marry than to be aflame with passion. 1 Corinthians 7:8-9.
Again, going back to Corinth, the Roman emperor wanted more children to be produced. And so he didn't want widows to remain single. He wanted them to remarry and to produce children. When Paul wrote this, he was giving widows permission to remain single, to live an independent life. He believed that the return of Christ was soon, and so did the church. And so he taught that they could remain single and live in devotion to Christ. That was very culturally right on target in that day. Let's get another question. Woman would ask, can I divorce my husband?
To the married I give this command, not I, but the Lord, that the wife should not separate from her husband, but if she does separate, let her remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband, and that the husband should not divorce his wife. 1 Corinthians 7:10-11.
Now, this is a tougher one to really interpret because I don't know of an instance where a woman could say to her husband, hey, see you, I'm leaving, and go ahead and leave. Generally, and maybe all the time, a husband could say to your wife or a wife, take your things and go, and she had to go. And then she had to fend for herself. An interesting thing in Corinth, women could work. And so different from what happened in other parts of the world where women could not work, these women could work and they could make their way. Now, for today, by the way, Paul told men don't do it. For today, divorce is one of the most difficult things that people have to deal with. And the only thing I can say to people who have been divorced, divorce is not an unpardonable sin. God forgives divorce. He knows the pain you've been through. He knows the difficulty. Accept his divorce. And hear me, please. People who've been divorced are not second-class Christians. God uses them, and some of the most usable people I know in the kingdom of God are folks who've been through the difficulty of divorce. Now, to people who have not been divorced, but maybe you're struggling in your marriage, and you're thinking, well, divorce might be a way out, I would suggest that you pick up the theme of Paul's letter to the Corinthians. Try living in self-giving love. Outgive your partner in love. And the two of you, if you can agree, we are going to live in self-giving love. We're going to surrender, we're going to give, we're going to share with one another. See what that does to your marriage. Here's a couple other thoughts. And by the way, I'm going to come back to 1 Corinthians chapter 7 tomorrow because there's so much here. I don't want to lose the continuity, so we're going to go there. Two thoughts really quick. At the end of our lives, really the only thing that matters is our devotion to Christ. Number two, the theme of God's wisdom of the cross, living in self-giving love, is best learned with the people that you are closest to. Thanks for being a part of this today. God bless you. Have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow for more of 1 Corinthians chapter 7.